I cannot believe we're already on the fourth round, are we not, Frank? Yeah, so we are halfway there. And that's the way the schedule is, that we have to end at the beginning of May. Now, as I begin to start, I'm reminded that for those of Scottish heritage, my spelling of Stuart may be somewhat discomforting, as I reminded by a favorite teaching assistant of mine once, Rod. Oh. And he said, you know, that's a French business, don't you? Somewhat hurtfully. And I said, well, whatever, not being of that particular connection. But in fact, the Scots would do an Stewart. And so this, they say, is the French version. But that's the way you'll find it mostly. So I think we'll be fine either way. And so let's let it go, unless you watch Braveheart every week or you have one of these Scottish cult things. But you know, and I know that the French and the Scots had such a relationship that it is not surprising that there would be, forgive me, Jenny, there would be Francophilia in Edinburgh. I'm not sure if it would be reversed, because probably not. We will try, if I can, to get all the way through the Glorious Revolution, in which William and Mary came to power, and happily for some, although I guess their descendants of the 21st century may regret it, the glorious time in which Queen Anne became the ruler of Britain as opposed to England and Scotland. And of course, I always think, oh, well, this is so wonderful. We can all be together, hands across England and Scotland, but not so much. It's been part love, part hate. And I think that still seems to be going on as we consider the issues. Now, as we consider this, there's always a tree waiting for us. And of course, this has to do with the Stuarts. But notice I get you one that's as simple as it can be. It's just straightforward, because as you people who know this period will be all too well aware, there are all kinds of branches out there, but I cut it out to avoid any kind of complications, I think, because we're going to the bottom. King James, that's where we're headed. And that's really all that we are concerned about, because our first Stuart king of both Scotland and England is going to be of really not particularly in touch with his parents or his childhood, thank goodness. So if you're worried about his psychiatric issues growing up, one would not think he would have many, although I don't know if people would agree. As you can see, his mother, Mary Queen of Scots, was married often and had a lot of friends. She dated quite a bit, etc. All of that then is to say it's truly a Scottish family, but a family with all kinds of complications. And again, for those of us with French interests, we also, of course, realize the French connection. And there is Mary of Guise. And of course, if we really want to go back, we have Tudor connections too. Oh, yes, we've got it all, don't we? We've got every cat, because you look back there and you say, wait, I know him. Of course you do. There's Henry. And you will see Henry's sister, Margaret. It gets really complicated, doesn't it, when you think about that? Margaret, who actually had two husbands, that is not simultaneous, she had one after another. So let's not add polygamy to the list of wrongdoing, but just understand that will create some very interesting situations, which we're about to see. He was not what you would say an attractive fellow. He was 37 years of age when he became king. They say he was bow-legged. He had, somebody said to me when I was a child, said, oh, they have a charming Scottish brogue. And I thought, does that mean good or bad? But they just let it go at that. And I'll let you judge that for yourself, whether you like to hear the Scots speak. Most Southerners do love to hear that particular way of speaking. But I can assure you it did not appeal to the English. Okay, so it wasn't like, oh, well, that's so quaint, that's so lovely. No, they really don't. You would think, but we're all British, give me a hug. Not so much. No. In any event, he was 37 years old when he became King of England, which, considering the times in which they lived, was a pretty vast age. He had his family, he had his wife and children, and he knew quite a bit. He was actually a scholar of some note. And he was delighted when his cousin Elizabeth passed on. I'm not saying he was happy she was dead, but he was very happy that he was getting the position, because we call the mover, we're going south. And when we go south, we know, or we think we know, great wealth awaits us. Little did he know, you build it up in your mind. You think, man, it's going to get to London and I'm going to be living high. Because let's face it, if you have kept up with England and Scotland over the years, you know that there's always been a wealth disparity between England and Scotland. Let's put it that way. And so it wasn't different at that particular time. And he was going to find out that if he wanted money, he was going to have to, shall we say, make concessions to get it. Shall I say, Mom and Dad, here they are. I know that you love those outfits. Yeah, how about that? And that look, that husband, he was kind of cocky, wasn't he? And he would not have been, and that's his number two. This is husband number two. And they were cousins. Remember that their grandparents were related. And so these have Tudor connections. And they were, in fact, there's Mary. She's on your right. And oh, him?
They look very similar.
Well, that may be just the artist, but they do have a similarity. But I suspect that's more autistic, don't you?
Probably.
In any event, they seemed happy. She'd been married to the heir to the French throne, Francis, but he died and she was shipped home. And so she was looking for a husband and he was looking for a wife, or should I say looking for a dowry. And why not marry my cousin who was going to be queen? And according to the tales, she was quite smitten with him, but I'm thinking Mary just enjoyed dating. What can I say? I can also say that she got over him. You know, sometimes you say this is forever. Well, I don't think this was forever in the least. Whatever feelings that she felt would pass, and he would be, shall we say, a tragic victim of perhaps a homicide. Well, not even perhaps, for sure. Let's just call all of this lurid, okay? And since this is not going to be some sort of Scotland true crime series, let's just let it go that she was a widow and she seems to have had what I would call a torrid relationship with her third husband. Well, I know, but it was, yes, we're not here. I'm saying for some rated R romance tales. We are merely here to say that she had a child by fancy man here. Yeah. And you'll notice he was called King Consort, and I'm thinking he may not have liked that, but it was better than Prince Philip got. So yeah, I mean, he got a nice title, but still, you know how some men have got to be number one. And so he probably had a hard time with this. And so in any event, they had their troubles, but he is out of the picture and her life goes on, more or less, as she will then abdicate and end up, of course, a prisoner. The baby, as such as it was, will become more or less reared by the Scottish nobility. You can't imagine, can you? Or at least I can't. What it would have been like to have been reared entirely by people who are not related to you. I mean, it's not exactly like being in an orphanage because you are the king. I mean, baby king, but you're still the king. And apparently he was brought up very much a feeling of his own authority and position. So I think he would have to fight for it. I mean, not so much in the way of combat, but in the way of making sure the nobles, the Scottish nobles, appreciated him in terms of his authority. He was a scholar of some note. We'll talk about. I tried to read one of his works called The True Law of Free Monarchy, if you're familiar with that. And of course, basically, it's about my power comes from God. It doesn't come from you. So understand that. So it's like this over and over, and you say, but I think you said that in the last chapter. So it's a little repetition, but you always get the idea. He didn't want you to forget it. And so that's how he dealt with the Scottish nobles. And it's like they would say, in comparing him with Elizabeth more or less carried it out in practice, but didn't talk about it very much. But King James likes to talk about it, sort of like rubbing it in your face. I'm the king. God and me, we're tight, and you are not. It's like that. When people don't want to hear that, they want you to work the crowd. You're special. I love you, and all this. But he was not as good about doing those things. That's for sure. Highly educated, and I always loved that nickname, the wisest fool in Christendom. The wisest fool in Christendom. And you had heard people described like they got a lot of school sense, but not much contact. That's ugly and hurtful to those of us who got called those things. But we understand this was clearly true of him. He was not particularly adept. On the other hand, he was King of Scotland all those years, and he had to stay in authority, and the nobles in Scotland could sometimes be a little unruly. So I'm thinking that was not always something he liked to do. Now, it's interesting when you think about his mother being Catholic and perhaps being involved with Jesuits. We understand that he was brought up in the faith that I'm sure his mother would not have been happy about. And that, of course, was Calvinism, or as we would say today, Presbyterianism. He loved everything about Calvinism except for one issue in the Church of Scotland. He liked bishops. And they didn't have that in the Church of Scotland. I mean, he wanted him to, but he just never got around to it. I'm in charge of the church. God, me, get it? So I'm number 2 in the universe. So, but he just wasn't quite ready to get these people stirred up about religion. So he left it alone, as we will see. So he's seriously Calvinist, and he'll write about it and all of the various beliefs of predestination and all the rest. And he probably had a very marked multi-volume set of the Institutes of the Christian Religion. And you can try going through that if you can, if you wish. And that will be very stimulating. And do not, no lazy boys for you. Yeah, that's that. And you drink a pot of coffee before if you get through the first volume. Maybe you can just get one of those famous note sets on that. I'm hoping. In any event, this is another appearance. You like his headpiece. He's all done up, fixed up. So when he comes south with the family, it must have been for them a great family. I don't know why, but I think about that old Broadway hit from the 1930s, We're in the Money. Remember that? The song, it's like because no, I'm not going to sing it. I've done it. No request, please. Strictly a bathtub thing. But it is a wonderful tune. But I always think about, it's not like I'm glad Cousin Elizabeth died, but it's like in Edinburgh, I'm sort of lacking so much. And you know how you always think there's more than there really is? That's the way it's going to be for him. Because anything's got to be better than the condition of Edinburgh and the Scotland monarchy. I mean, it's like we're, they always say, what is it? Proud but poor. I'm thinking they are. And maybe they were hoping, when you think about getting money from French marriages of the past, but I think they pretty much spent all that up. So in any event, they had expectations. Now, if any of you all can think about getting into an outfit like that every day and think about, you better be in good shape and do a lot of deep knee bends. And so you are ready to have that thing pulled up on you. Yes. So the Queen is there, who would make the trip with him. This is Anne of Denmark. And you think, wow, Denmark. Well, it's not that far when you're up in Scotland, if you think about it. And the Danes had the requisite dowry, so everything was worked out, I suppose, by the Scottish royal government and the Danes. Anne was, as her husband, somewhat extravagant, shopper. Nothing wrong with shopping. I'm not condemning shopping. I'm just saying that it's better to be a shopper if you have the ready cash. That's a lot better, isn't it? In any event, she became, relatively speaking, a popular queen. You don't hear a lot about her, in part because while she and her husband seem to have been close when they were younger, I think they went their own ways later on. But she stayed the queen until her death. They had 3 children, and we will see them. And this may have been one reason that they did not. They lost him when he was 16 or 17. Tuberculosis or something of the sort. He would have been king. And he was very athletic and all the rest that would have made him the perfect heir and son. But as it turned out, he did not survive his health issues. So the throne passed to the person whom we'll consider next week, who will become King Charles I and would be known by some as the Blessed Charles, but more of that when it comes. This particular queen, Elizabeth, named for you know who, was married to the ruler of Bohemia. Yes, part of a political arrangement by Protestants. And you say, well, what about their religion? Well, what it really has to do with, because by this point in what we call, well, wave my hand like there's a map there, but we'll get there soon enough. Yeah, ready to point where all of that is. It's like there were Protestants in Germany now, and you'll remember, some of you, about how in the 16th century they arranged that whoever the ruler was in the area of Germany, that particular religion would be followed. In any event, she was married to this ruler that was known as Frederick. They will be known as the Winter King and Queen because they didn't last very long in their positions. The period will, of course, be one fraught with troubles in the Holy Roman Empire, and this part of Bohemia would be the early center of it between Catholics and Calvinists. So she will be a basic exile. She'll come home at times, but she will always fight for her beloved husband, by whom she had oodles of children. Oodles. I mean, they just keep on coming, and it's like, yeah, just so many. But she is the daughter of King James I and Queen Anne of Denmark. Important figure. The Winter King and Queen. So an interesting couple, not part of our major topic, but someone interesting. I think, you know, it's like fathers and daughters have special relationship, and I think he would get interested, shall we say, because of his son-in-law's situation. And you mean those Catholics are causing you problems? That makes me so mad, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah, I think maybe that was a motive. So she's an interesting figure in the period. Guy Fawkes Day. We never forget Guy Fawkes Day, because a lot of people never exactly appreciate that, but we shall, simply because of the fact that, as one author put it, it's the last time that Catholics will try to use some sort of political technique to get their way. Catholic terrorism, you might say. Now, this has nothing to do with Ireland, none of that. So I have to be very careful in making sure we don't confuse that with this particular business, because this business had to do as with a group of English Catholics who refused to renounce their faith, and basically hoping to bring about some major sabotage of Parliament and the monarch. And when the ringleader, Guy Fawkes, was discovered, they were all detained and later executed. So that becomes a major celebration, I guess, unless you are a follower of Catholicism in England. I don't think that would be a big holiday, but it was for the majority of people, presumably not thinking about these poor souls who had to pay the cost. But they will consider this to be a minority of a minority. And the majority of people who were Catholic, thousands of them, will turn to other ways to bring about, I guess, what you would call toleration or acceptance or whatever it is they wanted, because obviously trying terrorism hadn't worked for them. Why is it connected to King James? He happened to be the ruler, and it was early in his reign. And he could have died. You know, when you think about it, he very well could have. And that would have been celebrated, because they would have looked at him like, you're illegitimate, just like Queen Elizabeth. Because remember how we saw last week, you know, they said some pretty hurtful things. The Pope himself, Pope Pius, yeah. That was just unfortunate. Words hurt, yes. So, most of us, of course, think about how James propounded the doctrines of Calvinism. When they had the question of how is he going to be the ruler, it will be in part because he's a Calvinist, and frankly, he's a man. Maybe they had abided Queen Elizabeth because she was Elizabeth. But in the back of their minds, there's always someday there will be a man with a wife and children, and he'll be king, and that will be better, simply because of that traditional concept, you know, king, queen, and the little royalty. Of course, these people, mainly what we call Puritans, and you know those folks well, not necessarily just the people who want the blue laws on Sunday, or like my grandmother said, and they were mowing their lawn while we were driving to church. I would never. The funny thing, I said, you know, to myself, I was saying, oh God, the pagans, you know, lawn mow on Sunday, how exciting. Yeah, in our little town. But the idea being, in effect, that the Puritans wanted more or less to purify the church. In many ways, you call them almost inside subverters. Yeah, they were going to be in the Church of England, and you would think, disguised as a mild-mannered Anglican. These people were secretly Puritans. And what it makes them Puritans? Well, not mowing. No, they didn't do lawns on Sunday, not that. What they wanted to do was cut out all the ceremony and hierarchy of the church. And that will be a problem for them, and of course for King James. But at first, everybody is just happy, gets there. Many of us have been to Hampton Court, taken the tour. No telling how much that costs now. Well, we won't think about that. You can do it online, save you money. And you understand, at this Hampton Court meeting, all of these divines, all these big shot clergy are there. And I'm sure many of them are Puritans. I mean, you don't wear a big P t-shirt. So I mean, it's not like, you know, hard Puritanism. It's like you could be more like kind of covert, you know, agent. She said, we're going to get rid of those bishops. I don't want a bishop, you know, that kind of thing. But at the Hampton Court meeting, it was probably an interesting get together because They were excited about the king. He said, oh, predestination, I'm into it and all of that. Could we read maybe some of Calvin's greatest hits or something? You know, it's all this stuff that will really get us excited. And at this meeting, and you see they're all standing and he's sitting. Does that tell you something about status? And they're thinking, boy, he sure does talk funny, doesn't he? That's his Scottish brogue. Don't forget about that, please. At Hampton Court. But one thing, of course, we can all agree on is the production of what will become the King James Version of the Bible. And this being one of the most significant versions of the Bible ever, and many of us grew up with it and know passages from it, regardless of what version we may use now. In any event, there was an agreement for this to be done. And somehow when I thought about this, you know what I thought about? Justinian's law code.
Oh, gosh.
I know it's sad, isn't it? Very disturbed mind here. The idea being that we associate it with King James. He ain't got time to do all that. He just basically sets it up. And so then everybody says, oh, it's the King James Bible. Well, I don't want you to think he's saying, gosh, I don't really have time to rule. I really want to work on the biblical translations. I don't think so. He just sets it up, and there are all of these biblical scholars of a particular sort who will now bring it about. And as I say, from the 23rd Psalms and on, we will recognize, many of us, these particular renditions. And this is one of the printed copies replicated here of the figures of Peter and Paul, or Moses and Aaron, or various other major figures there on this particular cover. So everybody's happy, or so it seems, but we know better. Because, oh boy, you don't be messing with my bishops. Because they think, well, he's a Presbyterian. Well, I mean, he's from Scotland. Did they get the wrong message? Because he did not at all agree with them. And he is famous for saying no bishop, no king. Yeah, the idea being that if I give in to you on this, then the next thing you'll want to do away with the kingship. That is to say, I'm going to use the word republic. And then you think, not so good in the 16th century, as we will see next week. It's not that people don't talk about it in the privacy of their own home, behind closed doors. We'll see there are people who will use the R word, but normally we don't talk about that. Monarchy, I'm sure you don't need to be reminded, is next to God. Yep. There's a reason we sit on thrones. God sits on his throne. So there we are. See, we have so much in common. So that is the idea of power. No bishop, no king. So, when you don't get your way, you know what you do? You always think, okay, you just smile and say, thank you, Your Majesty. We really appreciate you hearing us. And then you walk out saying, yeah, we'll see. Yeah, he'll come to his senses. That's the way the folks will do you. You think they're just going to say, oh, whatever you think is best. Yeah. Ha! No, not these folks. there were other things they wanted. They wanted to do away with confirmation. They wanted to do away with sign of the cross. They wanted to do away with the use of the word priest, make it presbyter or something else, because they associated priest with popery. Yes. And remember, if there's ever a fear of Jesophobia, can we call it that? The Society of Jesus could be lurking, you know? So that's always that. We want anything that smacks of Romanism, popes and such. We want that clear from our Calvinist church. And he really doesn't want to go all the way with them. And he talks with a funny accent as well. So there are going to be issues. But more or less, this is what they got. You wanted him, now you got him. So I think the term is learn to live with it. And they do, more or less, in the church. Because at least to please him, they will tolerate his lengthy and, I am sure, I wasn't there, but I'm pretty sure, boring lectures to Parliament from quoting from his own book, this True Law of Free Monarchy, in which he would quote from a book some of you read, the book of Hebrews, or other works that he thought would demonstrate the divine nature of monarchy. And by the 17th century, at the time he was king, we have to think about the people who were in Parliament, particularly in the House of Commons. People are more educated, more affluent, they have more land. And for this Scotsman to come down and tell them, well, you know, I just answer to God. And so you need to listen to me. I mean, we brought you from Scotland down here. I mean, don't you appreciate it? I mean, it's like that will be troublesome and problematic. How to win friends and influence people. If only Dale Carnegie had lived back then, he may have helped the king, because the king was not diplomatic or tactful, because they did not want to be lectured to by Scott on how they should be doing the government. Because Parliament, like the Puritans, and there's a lot of commonality there, Puritan members of Parliament, they want some respect. And they not want it merely theoretically, but they expect a kind of power sharing. You know, we are in charge of government too, sir. You know, we're all in this together. And he says, no, I don't think you understand. God, me, and then everybody else. It's like, I don't answer to you, and all you're here for is money. And I need it, lots of it. And that, of course, is very, very troublesome. Now, they liked his works on demonology. They were popular. It's almost like best-selling author, you know. It's like, go out and do that, because they're everywhere. They're everywhere, just like the song. Because, as many of you know, this is a big witches craze period, 17th century. So they could be under your bed, in your closet. You just don't know where they could be. And it's interesting to think that that was going on in that particular period. And considering what we learned in the early 21st century, late 20th, about conquering the evil tobacco, he was quite the anti-tobacco man, because this became very customary among the English in this time, bringing it back from their colonial adventures. Sir Walter Raleigh, there used to be something called, well, there still is, Raleigh cigarettes. Can you believe that? And that was named for none other than. And this is a terrible thing to say, but those of you who have boy children will know about people who expectorate the stuff. This is more grotesque than I want to describe to you. I would actually have students do it in class. I just got an ew on that one. You just can't imagine till you see one knocked over. Oh, yes. And I'm going to gather it so the poor janitor won't have to do it. Yes. And you say the mixed spittle and tobacco is not attractive. And I confronted the individual and I said, you do understand that this is not appropriate. He said, I needed to pay attention. So I put in my place. But yes, King James did not like it. And that sound they make, you know, when it hits, it's not good. It's just not good. So yes, he would not put up with it. I'm not saying that makes him any more virtuous. I mean, didn't Hitler like dogs and children? And he didn't eat meat. I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm not into personal virtue.
Hitler hated cigarettes.
Yeah.
The Germans were against it.
So all of that is not at all necessary signs of virtue. I'm just saying it's interesting.
Were they chewing tobacco back then?
Yes, that's what I'm getting at.
No, I was thinking they were always smoking it rather than.
And dipping it.
Yeah, like stuff. Like,
Dipping it. So put I don't even want to. No. I've tried to get those images away because that sound that it makes.
There was a brand of cigarettes called Parliament. It was powder.
Parliament. Do you think it was the House of Commons they were thinking of?
Yeah.
I was thinking about Raleigh, but I don't know about Parliament. I just think I always thought Parliament had to do more with just dignity and position. In any event, so much for his particular ways. Yes, I do have a map. I didn't want you to be mapless for long, because that can be very hurtful. The 30 Years' War, luckily for us, was 30 years. And yeah, that 100 Years' War is not going to be accurate, but this one will. It is one of the most devastating events, I would think, in German history. That is for sure. And has to do, of course, with the nature of the Holy Roman Empire and, of course, the status of the Christian religion in the 17th century. The fact that the English are involved has to do, I think, very much with the way that any power would be involved, the same way that, well, frankly, the members of NATO would be concerned about Ukraine. It's like the Calvinists and Catholics were very concerned in their disputes with each other. And of course, the English were very much involved with it, not just because the English are Protestants and sympathetic to their fellow Calvinists, but remember, of course, the king and queen's daughter has married this leader of the beautiful area we know as Bohemia. You see it on the map there, the White Mountain, and of course, who could forget over there in the east? Nobody here, I'm sure. Prague. Prague, yes, I can hear people getting excited. You might have thought I said Paris. No, it's Prague. But there in Prague, and there it is. Yes, indeed. I want to make this as short as possible because it doesn't concern, well, it all concerns us, but in terms of studying King James I in English history, it concerns us only because his daughter was the queen of that area and married to this young King Frederick. And they were young and they lost their throne quickly because there was what you call a Catholic wave. And so they were out. That is to say, they were out of their positions. Don't think they had a golden parachute either. I mean, they were already out. I think they were basically going around, and I bet she wrote some letters. Dear Dad, you know, could we get an advance on our allowance, or can you help out because these old Catholics have kicked us out? Because that's what's going on. There's an effort at this time, and I'm not going to lecture on the 30 Years' War, so feel relief. There's not going to be an effort of, or there will be an effort, but it will not succeed in re-Catholicizing the empire. That's what they have in mind. It's part of the sort of Catholic fervor in the empire. And then everybody else is going to get in on the action, including the Spanish. Luckily, none of that's our issue. But I did think it was interesting as we see the people, the Swedes get involved in this. And you think the Swedes, but they're lovely people. They don't cause anybody trouble. They did back then. They quieted down over the centuries. But believe you me, there was some action in Stockholm back in the day. And they are very involved because they are thinking they are Lutherans, and Swedish king, they used to sing "A Mighty Fortress is Our God" while they were marching into battle. You know, go get them. So that is, in fact, a memory that we have. And you say, what business do the Swedes have in Bohemia? About all the interest that the English do. It's like, let's all get involved and see what we can get out of it. The people over there in what we call Belgium today, the Spanish Netherlands, you see all that area north. They're a major area because they've got Protestants there who are living under the Spanish, and the Spanish, I always say, you don't have to ask if can I go to the First Baptist Church of Madrid, because it's not that. But the idea is we are seriously Catholic way down south. All of this will lead to a very, very interesting situation for King James I, because he's under pressure from family to get involved in this conflict in the empire, get your daughter and son-in-law's throne back. And so to do that, of course, we have to have major financial allocations. And as I say, he's already got terrible relations with Parliament because it's all of that sort of thing. You want to get the money, and then these people in Parliament, these well-to-do people, these noble people are going to say that always think, what's it worth to you? And there are always those kinds of issues back and forward. And he will call in his ministers and say, can't we think of another fundraising campaign? What can we do? Not donuts, but it's got to be something that we can raise money. Oh, selling titles, all kinds of things. You think, no, yes, they would do that. Big sale, you know, it's like, yeah, half off and you can be a baronet. And you think, aren't people a little ashamed to take something? No, shoot enough, you got the money, spend it. People would say, but you haven't had your title that long. Yeah, but after a generation or two, we can act like we are really old aristocrats and hold up our nose with the best of them. You know how people are. So the idea is that money issues, in part involving the 30 Years' War, but in part involving the fact that the king and the queen are big shoppers and very extravagant, and the question of favoritism. Because when you have favorites, sometimes they'll be on the payroll. And you think, well, I mean, if they're on the payroll, then they're doing an honest day. I know, an honest day's job. Like we tried to do for War Eagle University. But no, these are not like we tried to be. These people are hangers on. And they say, you got something for me? And the king would come through. And again, as we talked about with kings back in the Middle Ages, always, this will not work to the benefit of particular monarchs. And it certainly wouldn't to this one. And this will bring up the issue of King James and his own inclinations. We will never know the full details, and it wouldn't be of such an interest except his correspondence with these men was of such, at least by modern standards, adult, loving nature. They didn't have, of course, YouTube and all of the devices of the present day. But if the correspondence, when he refers to somebody as his, a younger man as his wife, or I know something of the sort, it does seem a little suspicious. Granted that etymologically speaking, language has changed. I'll grant you that. But it would appear that these individuals had some kind of power. Now, everybody's married, everybody has family. So it's not like somebody's living a certain lifestyle, because they're not. Obviously, the king's the king. And I don't think they care so much, at least I've never read anybody is saying, we don't like you to be involved with them because of your reputation, but they're very concerned about it because of financial aspects and their own power. And if this sounds familiar, then that means you know about King Edward II. Yeah, we've already heard this back in the 14th century. But in this case, the individual that we are speaking of, King James, seems to have been clearly of that sort. And meanwhile, when he is associated with these favorites who gain such power over him, and he's also so Scottish, what they like to do, and you may be familiar with it, I'm sure that those of us who are from rural areas will not be surprised about what happens after deer hunting. And you think, no, would they do this to Bambi's family? Yes, they would get on it and then cut it open. Yes, I know. I'm shocked too. This is horrible. But apparently the Scots really got into it. And his own English subjects found him disgusting because of, covering yourself I mean, after a lovely chappy luncheon, one doesn't want to think about that. And so I don't mean to be gross about it, but it's true that he really got into it. And again, he did talk funny. And so all of it, like ratemyking.com, you're just not going to come out with a lot of stars there. He was in every way an unpopular ruler. And in many ways, you have to feel a little bit of sympathy. I mean, because if he had gone fully into the war, that is Germany, he would have had lots and lots of complaints because that would not have been a success for sure. But just being involved in a minor way was definitely not a good event. But I can say the idea that he had of marrying his younger son to a Spaniard was very unpopular because, of course, do we really want a Roman Catholic queen? So here he is. He will be George Villiers, and he will be just the latest and the most powerful. And you can actually see, well, we're going to show you a small version of another portrait of him, but he's just one of these individuals from a Scottish family of some, what shall I say? They were significant, but not of the highest level. But like many people who are favor seekers, he knew how to play his cards right. And the king was just smitten. George Villiers then, he was the age more or less of the king's children. That's right. So he began, just sort of slithering in, the way people like that do. And he became very, very powerful. I just thought the look here was a very interesting one because he looked very 17th century. And he was very, very popular with the king and unpopular with other people of power, which is not surprising. Again, we don't care what you do in private, but we care very much about the favors and power. And that, of course, will, given the fact that Villiers was an upstart, I guess that word would not be surprising. Now, he's not the first. There were others, but this one would last, and he would actually be friends of the future King Charles I. But those letters, and they both have families, so it's not as if there's something going on here in terms of relationship. Now, what can happen when you have power? You can see this in the National Portrait Gallery your next time in London. They said he had really good legs. So you can see it there with his hose. So he had done up. And look at that knee. Oh, yeah, you thinking, what? Order of the Garter? That little upstart. How dare you? Now, that's what you call working your way up.
I thought that was
Yeah.
royalty. I thought only royalty got the Order of the Garter.
Well, I think the king will tell you who's going to be in the Order of the Garter. He was already Duke of Buckingham, and boy, he is strutting around too. And these people in the House of Lords, can you mention the bishops? And they're going like, huh. I mean, again, it's not like this is the first ruler who's pulled stunt like this, who's made people who are not of that rank. And of course, if you were smart, you would just say, well, shucks, I'm just here to serve the king, but I love you all very, very much. I respect you so much. No, no, no. Nothing could ever be that easy. Instead, Villiers will strut around with that garter and say, now you listen up, people. The king says it's got to be this way. And as the years go by and the king becomes somewhat senile, sickly, of course, the Duke of Buckingham, shall I call him that, so that we get that sense of power, and he will get even more so. He will, in fact, accompany the future King Charles to Spain to negotiate a possible marriage to the Spanish princess. And I can just imagine the folks in Madrid saying, you're kidding. You think we're going to let her live with you hellbound people? You know, it's like, no, it probably wouldn't work out. So, but thanks for stopping by. Have a good trip to London. You know, I mean, stopping in Madrid on the way home. Yeah. So that is very embarrassing. But Villiers was a very, very powerful man in the early years of Charles' first reign. And of course, the one who put him there, King James I, preceding. So that's what you call working your way up in power. And he definitely did. But it is a beautiful portrait, and it's huge. You just can't imagine. It's very, very interesting as you get to know the story of this man. And as far as being someone who is not royalty, getting to be in the Order of the Garter, I'm guessing by then, if by the king's insistence, being this intimate in the entourage, that you can get there. But yes, but that's really talking about a story of someone who comes up from the regular ranks. I don't mean his family were peasants, but still, they really made it big in that time. So he made it. Eventually, he will be assassinated, probably because of his power and influence during those years, because what they will do in terms of getting Charles' wife is eventually go to France. I know, you say, but aren't the French Catholics? Yeah, but they're not so Catholic. It's not Spanish Catholic. Now, those people are serious. But in France, they can handle it a little bit better. So it will end up, you would think, why didn't he just marry a German? That's a very good question. If you're so insistent on marrying someone who is Protestant, but apparently they were willing to have an interfaith marriage if the French would agree. And then, of course, there's always an issue, regardless of religion, of the dowry. And the French can offer a very nice one. The Spanish could too. But yes, so religion is important, but dowry is even more important. So there you are. In any event, he would definitely have other issues. He would stay in conflict with the Parliament, and this will go on into his son's reign, because they'll never adjust to the fact that you got to come and ask for money, because the tradition had always been the king could live on his own. That was the theory, at least. Because remember, folks, we talked about Henry VIII took all that monastic property. We have over and over again example of they have lots of money, but I told you last week, I think, they always used to say, don't spend the principal. And that's what these folks do. And Queen Elizabeth was one of the worst to do that. And when it's gone, and it isn't coming back. Okay. I mean, it's not like, oh, I can get another principal. Yeah, well, good for you. But for most of us, it's gone. And that's true of these kings. They spend it in one way or another, whether it's on favorites or, I mean, foreign aid. Let's spend it on these Bohemians. Let's get our daughter and son-in-law back on their thrones. But you know, you can't just talk about it. You got to do it. Some soldiers, I mean, they had some limited military involvement, but not a great involvement. Nothing like the Swedes or people of that sort. But anything costs money, as we are certainly learning in our own case. The idea, though, is that Parliament seems to like that, but they find fault, of course. They say it's not enough, or it's too much, or maybe we should oversee your fiscal budgets. And then, of course, the king goes, did you ever read my chapter in the True Law of Free Monarchy on that very point? And they say, yes, sir, it was great. We really enjoyed that. I mean, how many times did you have to listen to that man recite it? So, yeah, I mean, it's got to be an unbearable idea if you are in the House of Commons, because you want to hear from a king something like, You're so important to me. You're so wonderful. I really love you. Could you imagine Queen Elizabeth working the crowd? That's what I'm always thinking about the military and the parliament members wanting to be, what is a gross word they use, stroked, you know? And that is what I suspect these kinds of people, well-to-do, educated people, no Democrats, little d they. These are all of this element, but they want to be treated with that RESPCT, and they really don't like some king just saying, you vote, allocate the money, and then you all can leave. And times, and times have changed, and we are expecting some consideration. Well, obviously, Dan, this whole business with Parliament is a major concern, and much of it has to do with Spain. You think, why would Calvinist Spain have to, Catholic Spain have to do with Calvinist England? Well, much of it has to do, of course, with the colonial issues, because remember, this is the 17th century, so the English are very much involved here, as had the Spanish been even longer, particularly in North America, but in South America as well. And all of this will create friction, in part because who are we going to be friends with? Who are we going to be associated with? And it's not helped simply by having a new French princess to be queen when her time comes, because of course what she's going to do is basically say, well, I don't go to those services, because, she's not going to say, well, I just want to be with all of you. I love you all so much. And she's going to say, I'm not comfortable in these churches because you all are all going to hell. You know that. So basically, got to have a Catholic church, and I got my staff, not Jesuits, but no Jesuits. But we have some Catholic attendants, and we go to our church, not to yours. So there will be that particular issue always. And her name was Henrietta Maria. Francophiles will find it somewhat offensive that I anglicized it. As a matter of fact, a very distinguished Francophile on the road will do that. And I think I understand how you feel. But you will understand that she comes to England. They don't go to France. So, and she will be she's a very interesting and very important figure in the history of the period. But I just think it's interesting for us that they do not achieve someone who is Spanish, but instead someone's French, in part because of the lessened emphasis on religion on the part of the French as opposed to the Spanish. So it is said. But it is not a popular marriage with Parliament. It's like, can the poor man do anything to please these folks in Parliament? Even he got the bright idea way ahead of time. Let's all be as one. And you think, well, of course. You all love this. Years ago, I was taking students from London by train, And we were going up to Inverness, which is just beautiful up there, you know that area. And one student earnestly said to me, do I need to show my passport? Because he was very concerned about that when we got to the Scottish border. And I said, now let's consider the reign of Queen Anne, you know? And he looked at me, he said, oh God, do we have to know that? And it's like, those are very hurtful things to hear when a student says that, you know, you don't, yes. But the idea is, it's very hard to imagine that someone would think that in the 21st century, but yes, they did. And the idea is that when he suggested it, this is King James, he suggested it in Parliament, they said, you're kidding. You think we would want to have one country with them? The Scots, yuck. I'm telling you, I don't know how often, you know, I've seen people in London, Scottish people who hated every minute of it, and they were there for economic reasons, I guess, working and eating fish and chips and drinking more ale than was good for them, and saying lots of bad things about the English, I must say. And yeah, I know it's very interesting, but the idea was that he would remain, as would his successor, King of England and King of Scotland, and ne'er the twain shall meet until much, much later on, because I think of this, I don't know if I'm going to call it hostility or dislike or whatever it be of English and Scottish. Now, to be fair to the Scots, they contribute a great deal when there is a union, when you consider some of the great scholars like David Hume, the philosopher, and others. And when you consider the Scottish contribution to the Allies in World War I and World War II. I mean, it's on and on and on we could go. But it's hard to tell the English in the 17th century that it's simply for them, they saw no advantage whatsoever. And so it was out of the question. But I think it's very interesting that even at that early stage, it was suggested. And with that, he will, in fact, die a very sad death, and he will be succeeded by his son, who will become the very sad King Charles. King Charles, yes, Jenny.
Why was James' death sad? I mean, other than he died. Well, I don't know anything about his death. What was?
He had a disease, dementia, senility.
Okay.
He was, yeah, it was not pleasant, and it was. Queen Anne was already dead, and I mean his son would then become king, and that's what's a King Charles I. And you'll notice, as far as I'm aware, it is Charles I all the way around. He will not have two separate numbers, James VI. So that will give him a nice distinction. It's good to be the first, and he will be that and known to some because of little head chopping incident in 1649 as Blessed Charles I. Since, as I was told in college, the Episcopal Church does not have the mechanism for making saints.
Oh.
So that's about as far as we can go, the venerable or the blessed, but you can't make it like an official saint or anything of that sort. And we will pick it up there next time. Are there any question? I'm sorry, Jen.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Did Sir Walter Raleigh fall out of favor?
He did, yes, and that would end in his unfortunate demise. Yes, he will be executed. I'm sorry.
It is James's reign.
Mhm. Yeah, in James' reign, I mean, it's like you can be high one day and low but the capital punishment was going all the way. But I guess in that day and age, that was what they would have to deal with. Hey, everybody. So that would be a very unfortunate business, but it's funny you would think of Sir Walter Raleigh. Yeah, he was one of the big fellows, and it's amazing how quickly he fell from the time of Elizabeth to the time of James, high and low. And but he certainly did. Jenny?
I was gonna ask if you know, James didn't get heavily involved with the 30 Years' War. Did he know that Richelieu was financing folks? Maybe it's because French were helping and he didn't want to get in and be fighting the French.
Oh, I just think
Scottish.
he would have a hard time in getting that kind of financial support. He just did not have the wherewithal.
So you think that was what it was? Rather than
I do. I personally would doubt that he was as concerned about French interests as he was concerned. Now, he was concerned about religion, and he was concerned about his daughter and son-in-law. But again, you know, it's always the thought about how far do you want to go with this? Do you want to go all the way? And if he did, he didn't have the means, because that's always, and then some people are going to say, well, you didn't go far enough, or, you know, it's nobody's going to be satisfied. And that's probably the part of, he did, but there were English troops who were involved, but not, and you know, everybody and his brother were in the 30 Years' War, Swedes and folks from up north, and then people coming from England and France. And you mentioned the Cardinal, His Eminence, even though he was dedicated to the Prince of Peace, he may have well been involved in certain military activities. So all of this would indicate the problems or the issues of this terrible conflict and how that would affect King James. I think it's just unfortunate it had to come. I mean, it was more unfortunate for the Germans than I guess it was for the English. Definitely. Thank y'all, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.